everyone. My name is Joanne Loy. I'm an architect and content marketing manager here at Monograph. First up this afternoon, we're joined by Sreoshy Banerjea, and she is the founder of the Creative RFP Toolkit, and she'll teach us all about how to craft persuasive RFP proposals that sticks.
Okay, so why are we here? I really want to help everybody work smarter and not harder on their proposals by tailoring themselves to the client and really telling a powerful story. So I've been on both sides of the table as an architect and also a client, really understand what makes persuasive and memorable proposals. So all of you are here because there is a gap in the industry, and you sense that, right? There's a gap of talented designers not being able to communicate their expertise to non-designer clients. So how can we change that? But also, how can I tell you like how it perhaps is to think about it from like the client design perspective, like a human client-centered design perspective, right? So often clients have a pile of responses on their desk and not enough time to review every word. So how do you really stand out? And my real high level tip is really focusing on exceeding the client's expectations and being memorable with your proposals. And in order to be memorable, you just have to accept that it is actually a mystery. Like, it's not just you. I've done years of research on this, and I've surveyed several dozen architectural companies, engineering companies, and asked them like what their RFP pain points are. And the top 5 issues revolve around difficulty collaborating and team focus, customizing to the client, confusion on what content to include, balancing aesthetics with narrative, text, and interview jitters and uncertainty. So if this resonates with you, can you put which one of these perhaps resonates most in the comments? I'd be curious. And I'll keep going. So these issues that you're having are costing you more than you think. And if you're a small firm not approaching proposals yet, just know that this is of like a variety of firms and sizes. So when you look towards doing this, you can be ahead of the pack. So difficulty collaborating and focus, a disjointed narrative, it lacks a project approach. When you don't customize to the client, your proposal is pretty much rejected quite often because it just sounds too boilerplate. And if you are confused about what to include in a proposal, likely you're not being comprehensive enough and you're not talking about your project delivery as much. And balancing text and aesthetics is hard. So if you have too much text, then there's like a dry and dull proposal at the end, and clients have a tough time reviewing like 30, 40 proposals with like lots of text. So then they're shortlisting based on just what stands out to them. And interview jitters, lastly, like if you're shortlisted and you're at the interview, how do you get ahead of the pack by really being practiced and persuasive and getting ahead? So all of these pain points resulted in me like really thinking through what might be the best way to disrupt the pattern. So often same firms keep working on every project because they're tried and tested, and newer firms need to be able to tailor themselves to the client to be able to disrupt that pattern. And a lot of this is also resulting in like a lack of diversity and emerging firms to be able to be in the talent pool. So one of my goals is to try and figure out a way to level the playing field with this, because it's not supposed to be like a black box. I think the way you tell stories can really help increase your chances of winning new projects and scaling. So how do you exceed client expectations? Well, that's the basis of the roadmap, which is how do you create memorable proposals that are persuasive and tailored to the client. So, all right. So I'm going to slow down for a second. I'm trying to make up for lost time. All right. So before I get into the client pet peeves and winning factors, I want to ask, because I also did research on the client side and asked, what are your biggest pet peeves when it comes to reviewing proposals, and what are the most important winning factors? So if you don't mind putting it in the chat, what you think are the most pet peeves and winning factors. I think people are really talking about here customizing to the client's specific brief as perhaps a pain point. And I'm just going to say that that is like a big pain point. It's a pet peeve of the client when you don't customize it. So it's no wonder that it's quite tough to do that. So if you have any ideas, drop it in the chat. I'm going to keep going. Okay, so So biggest pet peeves really start coming from more simple, obvious ones to perhaps a bit more sophisticated. So typos and poorly put together proposals are one of the easiest ways to not get shortlisted, and everybody's working really fast, so it's hard to put together proposals if they're not enough time spent on them. Recycled narratives that are off the shelf is another big pain point, and lack of familiarity with the typology. So while there is not enough time to work very custom on every proposal, there has to be just enough work to do to tailor yourself so you don't come off sounding too boilerplate. I think that's one thing to take away from this, is that boilerplates help you be more efficient, but come off to the client, if not properly boilerplated, as templated and off the shelf. So as smaller firms, I think another exact thing to think about is that you have the luxury and also kind of the setup as the team structure to be more tailored, because you're likely 8 to 10 people, not like 500, right? So how do you play up your strengths? And that's one thing that I always encourage. As a smaller firm, it's important to talk about how you'll be personally involved in the proposals, and that projects, when clients choose you, will not just be like you like 10% of the time, but you'll be rather involved. That's something to like counter some of those issues. Other pet peeves involve disjointed teams that lack experience, a PM that can't present on the entire scope, and then also lack of clear management structure. So now let's talk about winning factors on the other side. So design excellence and portfolio is, of course, a big one, where you've worked on wonderful projects in the past and you have exact matching criteria to what the client wants. Then there's a strong relevant experience, and then also strong understanding of scope requirements. And all of these translate to the client in specific ways when you respond in proposals. So like you have to just make sure this is coming across, and I'll talk about how you can do that soon. And then the clear and creative explanation of concept and implementation strategy really matters. A good team with leadership and vision, and also a strong PM-led interview. If there's one thing that you remember after this whole presentation, is just that it's really important to empower your staff and your project managers, because they're the ones that in the end interact with the clients on a day-to-day basis, and the clients' project managers. So they're really judging to make sure that you have adequate staff that like is empowered, also very included, and just competent and confident. So those are things that I found in my experience with the culture of architecture, where it's in some firms mostly partners speak, or like the highest experienced person speaks. In fact, that can play against you, because it seems like the person who's going to be least engaged is doing the most talking. What about the actual staff? So that's just something that's really, I found, a surprise to many people. Okay, so let's keep going. So how now do you create a thoughtful and memorable and a persuasive proposal? So that's where the Atlas RFP response roadmap comes in. And I'm going to be talking about all the concepts and some best practices here. So there's 5 steps. There is articulating your value proposition. Then you have to tune that to the client you're going after. You have to lay out your narrative in a way that is comprehensive and tells a powerful story. You have to assemble an effective proposal. And then you also have to sharpen your interview strategy. So these 5 steps should round out everything about your proposal and response process that quite often is asked, like, how do I win RFPs? It's such a mystery. Well, okay, follow these steps and then it'll be clearer to you. So let's get into each of these steps. All right. Okay, so one of the things that I teach in my course is really stepping back first and just articulating your value proposition together. So whoever is going to be involved in an RFP response process, get them together in a room so you can boldly create your powerful story together. And this matters because it breaks down the hierarchies, and it also creates team chemistry that comes off as cohesive narrative, and also comes off as something that is hard to put a pin on, but is team chemistry. Like I've seen really rehearsed, wonderful firms that just know every single point of what they're talking about and have clearly practiced. And it almost feels like they've talked together early, really, really early on and defined their value together. So how can you get ahead of that and force that kind of pause? That's something that's crucial. So there's 3 steps that you could do. You can conduct a charrette, you can create like a value summary page for yourselves, and you can storyboard it into creating like a clear capabilities pitch. And a lot of people push back at this point, being like, wait, you haven't talked about the client yet. Should I not be tailoring myself off the bat? And I really say to that point, no, just think about your higher level values, because this is almost like a mini branding exercise done in an hour. And this will get you be able to talk apples to apples, and tune yourself to the client. Thank you. Somebody said, love the acronym. I appreciate that. All right. So how do you conduct a charrette? I feel this audience, all of you likely know how to conduct a charrette, but just really quickly, some quick tips are, when you choose a facilitator to do this, make sure they're the ones who are in charge of drafting the response. Because for them to be able to gather the herd and get everybody's input in the future when you're responding to RFP itself, it'll help build kind of consensus and camaraderie. You create an agenda that is talking about answering key questions. You ideate, and then there's a readout. Okay, don't worry, I'm going to get into the details. Okay, so an ideal charrette agenda for bid teams is really doing a group brainstorm around your firm's people, processes, and projects. And those 3 P's really matter, because that's what you're being judged on. Then you can break out and really deep dive into each of these topics and think about the values underlying them. And lastly, do a readout to everybody in the group. Of course, if you're a small firm, you can do all of this together. But the key is to really think about how to get yourselves aligned and on the same page about your unique value proposition. And the reason this matters is because there's 3 buckets that the client thinks about. It's really how competent are their people, how thorough is their process, and how relevant and compelling are their past projects. And that is really the makeup of your competitive advantage. So this is where I think, if you think about this for yourselves in the next module, in like tailoring yourself to the client, you will repeat this exercise for the client, because the client also has leadership, they have their processes, and they have their past projects, right? So if you can define a common language, it really helps be persuasive. So some of these templates and worksheets that I'm referring to are part of my course, but I'm extracting like the key principles which anybody can do, which is really like creating a shared definition of your values underlying your people, processes, and projects. So some examples of this could be your firm really values sustainability, and that's a value across your people and your processes and like the projects you do. It could be equity, it could be any other thing, but you have to really pause and think about it and do it with your key partners. So this is the people, process, projects process, and defining underlying values. Then you can create a summary of all of this and do a readout. And then lastly, declare it. And what I mean by declare it is really craft an elevator pitch. Think about why you are best positioned for the role, but answer that question now. Having done all of that deep dive thinking will make it easier. So the prompts kind of for a persuasive pitch are really thinking about, talk about your 3 values. How do you solve your client's needs and pain points? What sets you apart from the competition? And even quote like a testimonial. So once you've done all of this, write it down as an elevator pitch. So yes, all of this has to translate into the proposal, into the actual RFP itself, but I'm going to get there. Okay, so in terms of what we just talked about, you've articulated your value proposition. Now let's think about how you can tune it into your client. So often like people are like, how do we know what the client wants? Like that's just one of the things that I keep hearing, because it's just like, who knows who they are? Who knows who the selection committee is? There's just like a lot of unknowns. And while that is all true, you can quite often Google them. And I know this is like a simple, like obvious thing, but you can Google them strategically. Like think about their past vision plan. What are their like mission, what do they want in consultants? What does success look like for them? So really the key to tailoring your narrative is knowing your prospective client's values. So deep dive research will help you write a more aligned response, and early alignment in your values will give you insight into what content and copy to put into the proposal that your client appreciates. Okay, so these are the 3 steps for that. Conduct deep research on your potential clients' people, their projects and processes. Tailor that elevator pitch you just made after doing this PPP process yourself. And then think about strategic teaming as a tool to round out your weaknesses, but how you can still apply for this and solve your client's needs. So we'll dive into this now. Okay, so clients are humans too. I love saying this because at the other side, there's always, something to think about, like the reviewer is a mysterious committee, but at the end, they're all people behind them and they care about certain things. And often it's easy to, if they're public clients, understand what they care about because there's a trail of their past projects, whether that be in community outreach recordings or whether that be in vision plans. Like it's quite possible to deep dive into what they care about. So that's where I encourage people to stop and think about, have you looked at their website? What are interviews they've talked about? Have they worked with architects in the past? Q&A info sessions. So really like go back and do the exercise about values and just write them down and think about how they align with yours. So that's about their people, their processes. I mean, in terms of processes on the client side, I think a lot of clients perhaps really care about efficiency and design build, or some other clients care about a real strong community outreach process. So really like think about how your values align with each other for processes. And lastly, projects. What are their past projects? Similar to the typology that you're going after, right? You can ask them in an info session. You can really do a lot of research to figure this part out. And by a lot of research, another question I've gotten is, oh, but I don't have time. This sounds really like intense. I'm like, just do it for half an hour. Like, don't go down that rabbit hole, but just literally do this research for half an hour. You'll be ahead of the game for, other people that just submit a boilerplate. Which has nothing to do with the client, and then they don't get shortlisted. So this effort you're putting in earlier will help you move on further ahead in the process. So after this point, really like share it out with the whole team that you did the charrette with. So now you're able to know cohesively whether you're the best fit or not the best fit. It's almost like a good go, no-go process, right? Where you're thinking about your values, do they align? But then you have to really ask, okay, maybe I alone can't do this project, but can I create a strategic team for larger bids? So then, in terms of strategic teaming, this is kind of my guide to like a client's dream team, where really there's 4 buckets. And I can bet that a lot of people that are here, which are smaller firms or medium-sized firms, tend to fall in a couple of these buckets. And I've seen patterns. So let's talk about these buckets a little bit. You can use this to think about where you fit, because when you are a firm that has a topic-focused expertise, residential, schools, commercial, retail, whatever it is, you can say you're an expert in it, or maybe it's code compliance, or it could be like just project management. But if you start presenting yourself as a firm that can help other larger firms do that, if you're not qualified yet, it's like a ladder you're climbing. You start small, you're a sub to bigger primes, and then you slowly climb until you can lead these projects yourself, and that's like a way to scale your firm. So what are some of like the roles within these buckets? Let's talk about that. So technical experts is where a lot of firms fit in, where they're either the architect of record on projects, perhaps you have engineer expertise or a landscape architect or an urban designer. Do you fall within this bucket? If not, can you partner with other team members that are like different firms that fall within that bucket? So this is essentially like the 4 quadrants that needs to be part of your team if you're going after a project that's a bigger project or a bigger client. So project managers, right? So are you also in charge of quality control, cost estimating, code compliance? If not, and you're working on a larger project, how can you then bring in someone? Maybe that someone is like a diverse firm, or maybe it's a firm that has, you're that firm. Either ways, I think it's important to know that there's 4 buckets. Thought leaders is an interesting one. So often, if you're working on a large master plan or something where you're trying to be on call for like a public firm, they really care about advocacy for their projects, and also buy-in, and politics matter, and government relationships matter. So is there someone on the team that's like an advocate for, like, you know, um, just what you are going after? Are they recognized experts? Sometimes having someone that is known and recognized on a firm will be like, oh, that's interesting. This person can help us in the event that there's backlash. Like maybe they will be great at like a political platform or like an outreach event. So either ways, it's interesting to think about teams in this holistic way. And lastly, topic focused expertise. So this is one of the buckets that I find that a lot of emerging firms can brand themselves in, and some that have repeatedly come up in multiple teams and do large projects a lot repeatedly. And that's the kind of pattern I'm really trying to push against, being like, I'm sure a lot of you out there can do one or multiple points of these really well. So when you think that you can't do a project, can you brand yourself and network with people that you can then like partner with? So that's just kind of the whole purpose of the strategic teaming piece, which is think about not just your firm in isolation, but how you can be part of a larger team when you feel like you're not enough yourself to be able to justify that. So, okay, so after you've done all of that, really go back to your elevator pitch and tailor it. Like, talk about your shared values with your client, get more client tailored for, like, how do you solve their needs and pain points. So this is at the point where you're going after something and you have a client in mind, and your whole storyboard for your like mini branding exercise will become a lot more tailored to the client. So, okay. So those 2 steps have led you into creating an elevator pitch, which is now far more tailored to the client, and you're already at an advantage. So then let's keep going. Okay, so laying out your narrative is then the next step. So this will help you plan out what content to include and how to align them to their needs. Often people start here. People start in an outline. They start by pulling together past proposals, which is of course the fastest way, but not necessarily the most effective way. Okay, so then how do you storyboard a powerful narrative? How do you gather diverse case study assets? And lastly, how do you talk about your project delivery in 3 T's? So let's get into that. Okay, so why storyboard, right? And I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys. Again, there will be a recording and then you can ask me questions, but this is a 4 to 5 week course. So I'm trying to get like all the high level principles in, and you can always ask me after the fact. So storyboarding matters because it allows you to look at like a 100-page RFP document, collapse it into the key questions, and then put that into specific like sections. There's always a beginning, middle, and end to a story. So think about what your story is for your proposal for this client. And the fact that you aligned and tuned yourself to them, I think will make it more powerful off the bat. Okay, so this is one section that I think I'll just pause a little bit on, which is often there's submission requirements and RFPs that are really complicated. But if you have like a cheat sheet and you're able to put in what they're asking for into like a beginning, middle, and end, then you'll be able to keep track of the whole narrative. And often there might be a requested order, but 9 times out of 10, if you ask them, hey, I'm going to include everything you've asked for, but can I just shift around the order because I think it'll present my story better? You'll likely get a yes. If you get a no, you tried. But if you don't ask, you won't know, and others are doing it anyways and being remembered better. So it's like a thing, right? It's all about how the client on the other side is reviewing things. All of a sudden, after talking about your qualifications, if there's like 20 pages of resumes, it's like, wait, what is their project narrative, right? So think about like when people are skimming, is it making sense for them? Okay, so this in essence is really one of like the most patterned storylines that are effective, where there's an introduction where about your vision, your mission, your values. There is a statement of qualifications about your team, your advantage, samples of past projects, and then really like the proposal, the meat of it, which is your understanding of the scope, how you will deliver it, and like the high level concept, and of course how you will maintain quality control. So that's like the three parts to a beginning, middle, and end of like a good proposal. All right, so then we're going to get into how to gather diverse case study assets. So when you present your case studies, you have to think about exactly how the visuals work, how the qualitative impact metrics work, and like the project data. So think about ways you can gather multiple aspects of your projects. So whether that is visuals, like your sketches, your renderings, videos, whether that's infographics, or whether that's just project data, make sure you have a variety of mediums. I think that's really important. And I'm going to just go through the rest of the material quick because I know we started late, so you can ask me questions. If you have questions, please put it in the chat. So one thing to note is you have to reframe project delivery into 3 T's. Often people don't talk about how they will do the work, they talk about the work itself. So you should really think about how do you track the project, what technology you're using, and the teamwork tools. So then lastly, now how do you take all of that and assemble it into an effective proposal? You basically present yourself in a skimmable manner. So some of like the elements that you really should consider is having a great graphic layout. Most smaller firms don't have marketing teams, so there's very text-heavy proposals. So how do you really get the graphics in there? And how can you make your clients' review experience really like cohesive is what really matters. So these are the 3 steps for that. And then learn client user experience design. And I think this is something that is very key because being consistent, respecting white space, being skimmable really matters. And then I'm sure for those that want to go over this in the recording, I will go through this fast, but I just want to make sure I talk about one more thing. So I'm going to, for the sake of time, keep moving through this. Think about visual storytelling, highlight key information, embrace white space, and then lastly, do skimmable layouts. So these are just some examples. So talk about your team, have some headshots in there, talk about your shared values. If you have a elevator pitch that you've tailored, include it in your proposal with like some awards or just questions and answers. So just make sure you do the work. I mean, you use the work that you did early on and put it into this actual template. All right, so there we have it. You do the 4 steps, and then that will likely get you into the interview. And then that's something that I don't have time for today. But if you are curious about it, please reach out to me. And I will just go to my last slide, which is how to reach out to me. Give me a second. We can talk about interviewers later, but really there's multiple personas. And yeah, ensure good energy, eye contact, and ask questions. All right, so I just wanted to recap for 1 minute, which is that this is the 5 steps. The interview process is really a whole nother thing. So that's something that I also teach about. And then if you want to reach out to me, I'm doing a series of seminars in April, and I have a course platform that's hybrid and also live seminar based. So I look forward to talking more. So yes, questions. I know I went really fast, but I also lost some time. So I'm hoping there's, value that people got out of this.
No, that was definitely very jam-packed and a lot of information. I'm sure people will want to look at that afterwards. We did have a question just about the recording. All our sections are recorded and they will be uploaded to the Monograph YouTube channel probably in a week or two. So you can check that. It's just youtube.com/monograph. And I don't think we have any questions in yet, but I can probably give you some time to just talk about the interview process because you haven't had the chance to touch on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly talk about the interview process. Let's go back. Okay, so the interview process, give me a second. Okay, so the one thing that I will touch upon for the interview process, oops, can you all see? Yeah, you can all still see the slides, right? Okay, is think about the possible personas that will come in. The personas come into the interview. There's always different players at play when they're selecting. So there's five typical ones that I've seen, which is a visionary, a skeptical principal, a pragmatic project manager, and then an in-house expert. So how can you tailor your message to them? And then also do a dry run. So in terms of what really matters is it's important to make sure that the project manager leads the majority of the interview. If that's all you remember from the interview, remember that. Principals can introduce, but really hand it over to your project manager. And yes, the user experience design section. Give me a second, I'll go right back to that. And someone's asking a question about how do you balance firm branding and personality while trying to personalize your pitch. You definitely lean into it. Like, I feel like a lot of your about us section and like your introduction should really talk about your firm's branding and how you value what is your mission and vision of the firm. It's important to let your personality shine because otherwise it just sounds like every other firm. So, okay, so I know we have like a bunch of questions coming in now, but I'm just going back to this section for a brief second, just so you can like take it in. Okay, yeah, somebody's asking this question. Okay, share a proposal that you were part of that you were perfect for but didn't go well. Okay, so I mean, let me try and see. Okay, so I personally, more than 7-8 years ago, I mean, back in the day when I was doing architecture, was part of a team going after a school that one of the partners was an alumni at. And in fact, that made me think that's like the main reason we should get the job is because this person went to school here and is a celebrated firm and should be working on this project. So I was called in for an interview and I was very excited and nervous, but I didn't do much preparation beyond that. And I suppose I was to be the project manager. But because there was not much prep before, I didn't know that I had to speak or what to speak about at the interview at all. So while the principal spoke beautifully and really aligned to his experience with the school, I feel like we were at a disadvantage because I didn't speak at all as like a project manager and we didn't get the project. So that is really something that I learned from, where on the other side, now I know why, because if the project manager doesn't speak and have full control over the scope and work plan, it's a big red flag that the project won't go as well. So that was one of the takeaways I had.
Awesome. Thank you, Sreoshy.